Hello, boys, girls, and bees. I'm Empire by Channel. Today, we're checking out LGBT themes and characters in the world of JoJo's. I've seen a lot of people commenting and telling me that they would like to see me do a video on this because I've done one video on the themes, the queer themes in One Piece, and Hunt x Hunt, and you guys seem to enjoy these kinds of videos. So yeah, let's check this out. I mean, I've heard obviously JoJo is like very gay,
The JoJo
very
series has garnered
guy,
quite the
guy.
reputation online over the years for the often homoerotic
Yeah.
nature of its art. If you were to ask someone to describe JoJo in just a handful of words, I'm sure that the descriptor of gay or feminine wouldn't be that far down the
Hmm.
list. This idea has actually turned out to be somewhat controversial, with certain people becoming defensive over the
No.
label or
No.
attempting to deny the presence of anything LGBT in the series, often from a bigoted point of view. To dispel this right
Uh
out the gate, JoJo contains multiple confirmed LGBT
oh,
characters
okay. I didn't know if it was like actually confirmed or it is just like homoerotic.
scattered all across its nearly 40-year run. Beyond explicit representation, the series also clearly contains themes of homoeroticism that had already been present in the manga before that point. However, I feel like people often label the series that way without actually taking the time to analyze the nature of the series' representation or themes. So in this video, I want to do just that. Take a look at the
Hmm.
LGBT-centric themes and characters of the series, the ways that has evolved over time, and how it has influenced Araki's work. I think the
Oh,
lowest
oh.
hanging fruit when it comes to people saying JoJo is gay would have to be the pure surface level observation of Araki's art
Hmm.
gradually becoming more feminine over time. Of course, we have the more muscular characters of parts 1 to 3 moving
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, in the sense, like, this it's just normal, right? In the aspects of, I feel like it's just a very surface level observation, or it's like, if anybody dresses up like a feminine or in, more of, let's just say, like, an ambiguous kind of way, because from JoJo's art style, I think I've heard, that the creator, the author of JoJo is very, like, into that, the fashion and the look at the characters and in I mean, also, I just assume that as well because 'cause I've heard, like, things like part 5 of JoJo is in Italy, so from that aspect, the fashion would be inherently different as well, which is just more feminine. I don't know if it is Italy, I know it's, like, Italy, Spain, some place like that, but it's just I don't know, people are just stupid, It's just toxic masculinity plaguing
to the
everything.
more lean builds we see depicted in later parts. This is probably why a lot of people will negatively label the series as gay starting around part 5, a story featuring mostly men whose appearance and fashion take on a seemingly more feminine
Yeah,
appearance.
yeah.
However, I don't think this is an accurate assessment of the series at all, which isn't surprising considering the homophobic nature of a lot of those comments. In reality, the JoJo series has dealt with homoeroticism ever since its inception, and that can be clearly seen in both its art and the story itself. One of the best places to start would be with Araki's direct influences.
Mm.
Indeed, a lot of popular manga have dealt with themes of homosexuality, explicit or not, long before JoJo did.
I mean, I think that that's also just an inherent homophobic or, like, toxic masculinity aspect as well, like, looking at the lens of being like, "Oh, but, like, before they were buff men and they're buff men, or like so they're more masculine or built, and built men can't be gay, and so they have that perception of like, oh well, because they're like, more slender and more like, I guess, like twinks, so it's more gay, and I guess plus the effeminate clothing as well. But I do just think it is just pushing that narrative, that I mean in my real life I get as well, the idea of, if you are just, I mean, honestly, genetically you're just a guy, a man, um, if you are just naturally like, bigger, hairier or whatever, that means you can't be gay because you are on a surface level perceived as heterosexual because of the stereotypes of the way that you dress or the way you look. It's yeah, it just I don't know, it's just
Like with all things
what
manga,
happens
you
in
can trace a
society,
lot
you
of it
know?
back to the stories of Osamu Tezuka, whose massive body of work has touched on LGBT themes multiple
Oh,
times.
wow.
In perhaps the earliest example, Tezuka's 1953 manga series Princess
Wow.
Knight depicted its main character Sapphire as androgynously switching between
Mm.
female and male roles. In his 1976 drama series Moo, Tezuka depicted an explicit homosexual relationship between
Oh,
two of
wow,
its main
okay.
characters. And in one of his most famous series, the 1973 medical drama Blackjack, we have the appearance of Kei Kisaragi, perhaps one of the earliest transgender characters in manga who
Oh,
switches to
wow.
living as a man after undergoing surgery. It goes
Wow.
without saying that Tezuka has influenced Araki, as is true for all other manga artists to come after him. But Araki has actually spoken about Tezuka's influence more directly. After all, Araki's debut one-shot, Poker Under Arms, was selected as a runner-up for the Tezuka Awards, and Araki met Tezuka himself
Wow.
as a result of this. In March of 2025, Araki spoke at the Tezuka Manga Museum to celebrate its 30th anniversary, and cited much of Tezuka's manga as an influence. When discussing Blackjack, Araki highlights the first 6 chapters of the reissued first volume as particularly great, one of which is the
I
19
think it's really, amazing and cool to see, somebody that's actively been creating for so many years and talking about, their influences, their passions with their work, and, somebody that has changed, inevitably over time with, the world changing over, 30, 40 years of, writing his stories. I think it's really cool to see,
74 chapter featuring the first appearance of the transgender character. I think it goes without saying that Tezuka broke ground not just through his storytelling, but also with the representation of
I
LGBT
mean,
themes and
at the
characters,
time as
which no doubt
well.
influenced the work of Araki and many others. I do think that when it comes to popular manga,
I
Japan
know I know Gigi Romantica.
is often more open to these themes than a lot of Western works are,
Mhm.
since even to this day there seems to be an apprehension to certain themes in mainstream movies or TV. However, Araki is also known for being heavily influenced by Western comics, art, and fashion, and
Mm.
when it comes to LGBT themes, those are absolutely worth mentioning. As an artist,
I mean, I do think it's an interesting note to look at or think about the idea of, Japan seems to be more willing to have themes, obviously BL and yaoi manga and anime and things like that. There's the whole giant sections of BL manga in just your normal bookstores, but that does not translate to complete openness in real life. And I don't know if it's the idea of fiction and reality, but I think that um with Japan, I think it feels inherently different because I do agree with I think that if there was as much prevalency or if quote unquote um BL would be in comics as much of a thing in the Western world or in America, I think people would be way more upset and would not let that happen.
Araki wears his influences on his sleeve and is constantly paying homage to all kinds of work across different mediums. Obviously, we have the famous music references and the many
I've
homages to
heard
his
this.
favorite films we see in the story.
He's
However,
very
Araki
influenced
also
by
references
music.
poses seen in other pieces of art and photography, which we can see appear directly in
Wow,
his
that's
work.
really
One of
cool.
his earliest and most common influences is the work of the Puerto Rican fashion illustrator Antonio Lopez. This
Mm.
is mainly seen across parts 1, 2, and 3, with many iconic poses and outfit designs paying homage to Lopez's work. In particular, I noticed the striking feminine lips of Araki's male characters being a
Mm.
direct parallel to many of Lopez's pieces, which were in turn drawn from both male and female models alike, creating a generally androgynous quality to both. What's
Wow, it's
also
very
notable for
cool
this
and
discussion is that
beautiful.
Antonio Lopez was an openly gay man who explored themes of his sexuality through his work.
That's awesome.
Another prevalent influence in Araki's early work is the artist Tony Viramontes, who we see referenced almost as much as Lopez in the early JoJo parts. And once again, we see male and female figures alike being referenced to create JoJo's iconic style. It's also from Viramontes in particular that we see one of the most
I think it's so cool. Like, I think it just shows that Araki is such like an artist. I love that he puts his passions into his work through his influences. And I think this is like genuinely a thing of just like, I don't know, bigoted people. I think it's just so I think, they're just ignorant, it's closed-mindedness of looking at things only on a surface level, and like it's saying, like looking at part 5 and looking at the first parts and saying it's gay now, but then you know because it's clothes on a more slender build that makes them more gay, or even though, like it's showing here, there is depictions of androgynous fashion being put on, I guess, quote unquote, more masculine bodies, or more built men that are perceived as heterosexual because of their structure. But art, like with fashion specifically, though, I think it's stupid when you think of history. There's men would wear skirts, kilts. There's so many levels of outfits and things that men would wear in history, which nowadays would be quote unquote considered as effeminate or like women's clothing, but it was what men would wear, centuries ago. So I think that whole, you know, idea of the social construct is fucking stupid.
iconic poses in the JoJo series through Dio in Part 3, also taken from an illustration of a female model. Like Lopez, Viramontes was also a gay man, and his work portrayed the beauty of men and women in a very unique way. It's starting in Part 4 that we begin to see Araki take on a new influence, with many of his illustrations from this point on being direct references to fashion magazine photo shoots.
Wow, that's
Just like before, we see
awesome.
Araki referencing the
That
poses
is
and clothing
really
of models
cool.
regardless of gender, which I feel leads to the blend of masculinity and femininity that
Mm,
is most iconic to his work. The
I
sheer
love
amount of
that.
poses referenced is too many to even show
I
in one
love that so
video,
much. It's
but I
so
think with what I
cool.
have shown, you can start to recognize the inherent sensuality of his art. Araki has mentioned the influence Italy has had on him, which is not at all surprising with him drawing on that country for his story's settings multiple times.
Mm.
He specifically points out the prevalence of Italian fashion and the aesthetics of gay culture, leaving an impression on
I
him,
Italian fashion is amazing, by the way. It's
which
gorgeous.
greatly influenced his work. Moving past the artwork, Araki has also depicted many explicitly LGBT characters in the story itself. Now, the degree to which this is depicted in the story certainly varies. Many
Mm.
characters have the inherently androgynous quality of Araki's art while being within the story heterosexual. I would say Araki's first and most obvious LGBT character is the series' most iconic
Wait,
overarching
Dio,
villain.
oh, Dio's queer? Yes! Oh my god, that's, wait, he is? Wait, that's based. That's actually based as hell. Okay, go off, Dio. Okay, go off. Go off, Dio. I mean, you know what? You can take over the world
Dio
now.
Brando.
If you're a gay
This
king, you
also
take over
brings
the
me to one of the
world.
most important sources I'll be drawing from in this video, Araki's 2007 interview in Eureka magazine, where he speaks at length with the sociologist and yaoi manga expert Junko Kaneda. Kaneda has written extensively on the history of BL, or boys love manga, through the lens of gender theory and sociology.
Mm.
Kaneda is what one might describe as an eccentric character, which has led some people to attempt to dismiss this interview as a rabid fan projecting her headcanon onto Araki with him just playing along. However, I disagree with this reading, and I think it's clear that the interview is good-natured, and Araki seems genuinely interested in her unique reading of the manga. The
Mm.
part I do want to focus on here doesn't actually come directly from Kaneda, but from Araki himself. Here Araki says fairly explicitly that Dio is bisexual and could go for either a man or a woman.
Yes! Wait, it's like, if you're going to insist now that I hear it, I'm starting to think I might have had something like what you are thinking in mind when I drew it. Laughs. Either way, Dio's the sort of character who's not afraid of that sort of thing, whether it be woman or man. He can go for both.
And it isn't
Yeah,
just in the
that's
Kaneda interview
power.
either, since in a talk at Tohoku University that year, Araki again says that Dio is interested in both women and men. I can also say confidently that this
Absolute
is not
power
some
move.
post hoc insertion of representation onto a character that it wasn't written for. Dio is a character deeply rooted in sexuality, and this had already been directly portrayed in the manga itself decades beforehand. I've already mentioned the deep influence of gay artists on the early arcs of JoJo and how their art's androgynous quality carries over to the characters themselves. In the case of Dio, he has the most androgynous appearance of the early JoJo characters, and has been directly referred to as having a hypnotic beauty towards women and men alike.
Damn,
Dio's status as a
okay.
vampire is no coincidence here. Vampires in fiction are very often linked to sexuality and societal taboos of the past, such as homosexuality. Because of this, it was often through vampires that homosexual relationships were able to be explored in fiction in eras when it may not have been possible to depict otherwise. Perhaps the most famous vampire story, Dracula, is itself very homoerotic if you ever
Oh,
read the original
never read
novel. And there is
Dracula
a
or
fairly
watched it or
founded
anything.
theory that Bram Stoker himself may have had suppressed homosexual desires that he projected onto the Dracula character, a character
Interesting.
that he based on a real-life acquaintance. And based on the scenes Araki has referenced from Dracula, I can say with some confidence that he has read the novel before and may have picked up on some of these themes. While Dio's appearances in parts 3 and onward are the most obvious thing to bring up, I actually think there are some notable themes of sexuality with him going back to Phantom Blood. Following his initial defeat, Dio is shown to have developed a respect and admiration for Jonathan that is so extreme that it even borders on romantic.
Whoa,
Dio says that
okay.
their two fates are intertwined and that no relationship in history has existed such as theirs.
Whoa.
He says that he believes the two of them make one, which is why he
Hello?
wants to
Oh,
claim
damn,
Jonathan's body
okay.
as the replacement for
Wow.
his own. This raises a lot of questions for Dio as a character, especially when we know he would later sire children through Jonathan's body, and that those characters are viewed as simultaneously being the sons of both Jonathan and himself. By the time of Part 3, Dio's beauty and charisma are noted by multiple characters, including men. When Avdol relays his brief meeting with Dio before the events of the story, the words he uses to describe him simply couldn't be read as
Wow. Was a man like none I'd ever seen. Oh my god. Look at his stance. Yo, why he got such a snatch hip? Like Dio's kind of like he's snatched. Well, damn. All right. I mean, I do think this is really interesting. I think like I've always been intrigued by JoJo. I think I've seen a little bit of JoJo's, but like Araki's just artistic influence from things that he's been influenced by, like but specifically like the art and just the expression of it. And I think that um it's almost this like mix of um that people perceive it, or you see like the battles, and it can feel like high testosterone battle, but then at the same time having this semi like sexual erotic effeminate or androgynous nature to it as well. I think it's really cool. It's really intriguing to me.
any way other than sexual, with Avdol nearly becoming hypnotized by Dio's beauty. Notably, he
Wow.
points out that Dio
Damn.
possesses a dubious sensuality that one wouldn't expect from a man. Throughout Part 3, we see that Dio controls his minions through a variety of methods. Some, like Kakuin and Polnareff, have a flesh bud that maintains mind control over
Ew.
them, while others are simply paid mercenaries or are controlled through fear. Some, however, are controlled through romantic devotion, such as Mariah. I think the same could be said for Undul, who has no indication of being controlled by a flesh bud and describes Dio as both strong and beautiful. And his devotion
Oh,
is
but look at his waist. Damn, he is snatch.
so extreme that
Yo.
he is willing to commit suicide
Dio
to a
absolutely is snatch. Oh my god, look at this. Look at the pants he's got on too. He's hot. Like
avoid
damn.
inconveniencing him. Vanilla Ice is shown to have a very similar relationship with Dio, and with him being one of Dio's most trusted followers, I wouldn't be surprised if this was romantic as well. One of the more recent developments with Dio's sexuality comes from the book Hirohiko Araki's New Manga Techniques, which elaborates on Araki's creative process behind writing villains.
Wow,
As part of the
that's
process
cool.
for creating a character, Araki makes a character sheet that covers everything about them. The original
That's really interesting.
versions of these sheets are not preserved, so he recreates some to serve as examples. On certain characters' sheets, we see their sex represented with a female or male symbol. For Dios, however, he uses a male symbol with a line through it, which is often used to represent people with an androgynous gender identity.
Oh.
It's not 100%
Hmm.
clear what Araki means by including the symbol, since
Hmm.
Dio is still referred to as a man in the manga itself. What I take it to mean is that with how Dio has progressed beyond humanity as a vampire, he also exists beyond the concept of typical
Hmm.
gender itself, enough so that Araki felt the need to differentiate him in some way. And this does fit in with how Avdol and other characters describe
I
him.
think that's really interesting in the sense of it could almost be like, I think it's really intriguing of like a villain, right? And they think that of themselves as like they're above everybody else, and that they're so above everybody else that they're kind of like uh, a being that may be even like above something like the concept of gender, and that he's more than that. And I think that's really intriguing. Or, thinking about the idea, it feels like people sort of follow Dio in the sense of like, like like cultish, like he's almost this beauty that's like a god. And to think if he like thinks of himself or perceives himself in that way, it would make sense that if he was like, like it says he's a male, but it he doesn't define himself by the by the restraints of of the construct of gender identity,
him. The idea of a character
the social
beyond gender is
construct.
also one that Araki has repeatedly expressed interest in writing, which I'll get into later. Now, Dio is probably the most high-profile LGBT character in the series, which isn't surprising considering I just spent the last 5 minutes talking almost entirely about him.
There might be some
But
more
next,
side
I'd like to cover the
characters.
other characters that we've seen sprinkled throughout the series. Our next stop here is in part 5, which has the brief appearance of Sorbet and Gelato, two members of the
Oh,
assassination team that
hi.
are heavily implied to be in a romantic relationship.
Oh, cute.
Later on, we have the similar duo of Tiziano and Squalo, who are both shown to be extremely devoted to each other and are particularly physical together. Part 5 is
Whoa,
also where many of
cute.
Araki's most androgynous designs start to appear. Araki himself has commented on this as well by directly referring to Giorno's appearance as androgynous, which he has said is inspired by gay fashion. And this is pretty fitting,
Go off. Araki's a real one.
since Araki actually originally intended to make Giorno a woman, but later put off that idea
Oh.
until part 6. He even toyed with the idea of keeping Giorno's gender a secret throughout the story, with him being revealed as a woman at the end. With others such as Abakio and Narancho, we can see that their designs are directly based on women's fashion, with Abakio even shown wearing lipstick, as would become a common design trend for many of Araki's male characters going forward. In Araki's book, he also goes over the design of Bucciarati, saying he chose his hairstyle to give him a more feminine silhouette that exudes
Ooh.
eroticism. Like the others, we can also
Okay.
see direct parallels to female fashion models.
This is I love that. I love that he seems so like, he's so particular with like it seems like he research like in saying he makes a character sheet, and then he seems to be so like intentional about picking the fashion and his fashion influences, and that he designs a character as well with like the idea of the innate like what's the perception they give off in the sense of their design, if it's like a feminine, masculine. I think that's really or like androgynous. I think it's really amazing. I mean, it's really cool because I've never seen I've never heard of or seen, uh, you know, a quote unquote, like shonen series, which you would put in with like, One Piece, Naruto, Hunter x Hunter, um, Bleach, that has this kind of um like way of designing or creating characters, or having, characters like this in their designs.
In part 6, we saw Araki's depiction of sexuality open up even more. In its opening chapters, we have a brief appearance of a
Oh,
transgender man as one of Jolene's fellow prisoners, something that was omitted in the anime adaptation. Later on, we have a humorous comment from Jolene on snails being able to have sex with anything, and her
oh,
saying that she's jealous
whoa.
of them, briefly hinting at her being bisexual herself. Perhaps the most notable topic to go over here would be the character of Anasui. There has been a long debate among JoJo fans about how Araki intended to write Anasui's gender, and I've actually had a whole video
Hmm.
going over just this topic alone. This
Interesting.
stems from the fact that when Anasui was first introduced, he was drawn as a woman, and switched to a
Oh,
man later on. There's been a
wow.
lot of arguing over this, with some saying that this was due to editor interference, since if Anasui were a woman, that would lead to a lesbian relationship between them and Jolene. However, despite this being said with certainty across a lot of the community, there is actually no source at all for this
Mm,
claim. We also don't even know if the romantic aspect of Anasui's character was even planned at the time of his first appearance, and it may have only come about after the gender swap.
right.
Later interviews give us an idea of exactly what Araki was trying to go
I
for
mean, I
here.
think in general, like, with specifically with like, trying to look at interviews and then translate the interviews, so many like things can just get misconstrued, or somebody translates it and then somebody else tries to reiterate that translation, and then they put it on like Reddit. And then it filters out. It's like a game of telephone. So it's hard because I don't that's why I don't always like I try to take these things with a grain of salt, because unless I'm seeing the direct, like, source material of what's being said, I don't think you can always 100% trust, the word of mouth of people because, like I said, not saying that they're purposely misconstruing, things that are said, but just because, like I said, translations can be, misconstrued, or words can be changed based on translation as well, and then people just mishearing, changing words, or it's being regurgitated.
Here. In his panel at Luca Comics and Games 2019, Araki stated that with Anasui, he initially wanted to portray a completely androgynous character that went beyond
Oh,
the standard definition of gender, but that the character eventually morphed into being more masculine. It's clear that
mm,
Araki has been interested in this idea for some time, and he
that's
did something very
awesome.
similar with the portrayal of Dio, but it seems he didn't quite commit to the idea in Part 6. In Part 7, we also have Scarlet Valentine, the first explicit lesbian character in JoJo, with much of her story
Yes,
based around her attraction to
lesbian.
Lucy Steele. Finally, we
Yeah.
have Part 9, the JoJo lands, and the main character's sibling, Dragona Joestar. Now, at our current place in the story, we don't quite know what Dragona's gender identity is.
Hmm.
In the first chapter, we see that Jodio refers to Dragona as his brother. We also learn from his narration that Dragona loves women's fashion and receives cosmetic injections which cause a swelling in their chest. In
Oh.
Japanese, Dragona uses the feminine personal pronoun atashi. That isn't
Hmm.
really as cut and dry as it sounds though, since the Japanese language doesn't really use he or she like the way
Hmm.
we do in English.
Hmm.
The fact is that Jodio is somewhat of an unreliable narrator and may not fully grasp Dragona's gender identity. Really, we won't know for sure unless Dragona themselves speaks about it at some point. And I do foresee that happening since hardships related to Dragona's gender expression plays a big role in their backstory, something that I feel was a very
Interesting.
realistic inclusion from Araki. Back when this
So what did it say? Okay, well, someone like you really should have a bra. How about we draw one on you? Whoa, hey everybody, hold him down for a second. I'm gonna draw on his chest. Whoa, what the heck? We all need a good laugh now and again. This is just a funny little haha joke, some light teasing, a gag, nothing more. It'll just make his skin a little red. What the fuck?
story, something that I feel was a very realistic inclusion from Araki. Back when this chapter released, some people were against this, but I think Araki did the right thing by injecting the harsh reality of how transgender or gender nonconforming people are treated instead of just glossing over it. JoJo has depicted
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that I think that it's really powerful for somebody like Araki, or for, a series that is as big as JoJo's. And like, I don't agree with, tough subject matter to say, oh, like it's a little like too much, or like, you gotta calm down, or you gotta like bend things, or soften the blow. But it's like, if this is meant to be a depiction of the reality of that said identity, or what you are trying to portray, I think that it does a disservice when you are not showing the true nature of what happens to people who are, who in real life live that said reality of the identity. I think you're doing a disservice because how I see it, it's either you you show that and you show it, or you don't. I think it's worse to me if you were if you were to depict something like, um gender identity or the harshness of queer themes, but then half-ass it, then just not doing it at all. I think you show or you don't. And I think specifically, with the way the world is now, I think it's really important to show those things and to show the harshness of these themes, because that's the only way to show people the true reality of what people do go through in the real world nowadays.
Societal injustices and abuse before, and I think ignoring it entirely wouldn't be a good idea. Another reading I've seen of Dragona's character from some fans suggests that the character may be making reference to the concept of Mahu, a third gender present in native Hawaiian and Tahitian
Oh,
cultures.
interesting.
Again, we don't know if that's the case for sure, but it is notable considering the part's Hawaiian setting, and it's possible Araki could have learned about it through his research. Last year, there was also a
Wow, does
comment from
Araki goes like travels to research things for the series? That's wow. Araki sounds like such an amazing man, like such a incredible, not just like a mangaka, but a true artist, a true creative.
Pascal Lafine, the manager for the French publication of Part 9, where he stated that Dragona is transgender. However, I would consider this sort of a tertiary source, and this person doesn't actually have any contact with Araki on an editorial level. Personally, though, I do believe Dragona is transgender and that
Hmm.
the story will likely go in that direction. Like I said, we don't know until the character says so, but I think Dragona's action of openly presenting as female and undergoing cosmetic
Hmm.
alterations to do so isn't something that would be done by someone who is just breaking gender
Right.
norms.
Um, yeah, I guess I have to wait and see, but if that is something that is like confirmed, or if they inevitably get to part 9 in making it into an anime as well, and that is like a confirmed thing, I think that's really cool. I think that's really interesting to see like a main character in a series like JoJo cover, trans themes, and a character who identifies as trans and the difficulties they do go through. I think that would be very interesting, and some good representation.
That's about everything there is to talk about today. I've always had a fascination with Araki's creative process, and getting to do a deep dive into this aspect of it was definitely rewarding for me. If you're interested in looking deeper into some of what I mentioned in this video, I recommend checking out the JoJo Wiki's reference gallery, which shows all of the known fashion shoot photo
That's
references for
really
the
cool.
characters. The full interview with Kaneda that I mentioned is also there if you want to read it. Finally, if there's anything interesting you think I missed, be sure to bring it up in the comments section. Araki's influences and various statements are so widespread that I'm sure there's some I didn't get to, and I'd love to hear any that you find interesting. And if I learn about enough new stuff along with whatever else comes up in the manga, I may make a follow-up to this video to go over some more. If you want to stay updated on future videos, make sure to subscribe and click the
There
notification
is there is a follow-up, so let me know if you guys would want me to do a part 2 of this.
bell. You can also join the Hamon on
I was like, there's
Patreon
more
and consider my
time.
favorite, but I do find some of them particularly
So why is
interesting.
there's more
You
time on
head.
this?
They
So I just wonder what.
and can submit viewer questions. This video's question comes from Fiddlehead. They ask, what are my
Oh,
favorite and
okay.
least favorite
So yeah, no, that was a great video though. Like I said, let me know if you guys want me to do the next part, because he did do a part 2, but um I've heard things about Araki through, like, I'm a very big BL like manhwa reader. I That's kind of my guilty pleasure, just reading BL. Um, but I've heard things about Iraqi as a creative, and he just really fascinates me. Just like I think that like I really think there isn't anybody like him that I've I've heard of, like, a manga creator. I love how it feels really like, from the aspects as well, like how long he's been doing JoJo and how progressive he is in his creativeness, and how open-minded he is in exploring things and, um, looking at the world of, music, of its fashion, any info it feels like he really wears his heart on his sleeves in putting the influences that have made an impact on him, inject that straight into his work, and I think it's really cool. But, yeah, let me know in the comments what you guys think. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and just video, please consider subscribing, like to share the video with more, and I'll see you guys next one. Bye-bye.